Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. And we are at part 2 of a 2-part series on the Enneagram with our very special guest and friend, Beatrice Chestnut. Welcome back to Personality Hacker.
Thanks for having me back.
So in part 1, we're actually focused on Beatrice's book because we actually interviewed her months ago about her first book, The Complete Enneagram. But Beatrice has written a book called The 9 Types of Leadership, which focuses on using the Enneagram in the workplace. And in the last podcast, we talked about the 9 types of leadership and went around the wheel, the Enneagram, and talked about some of the quirks or some of the things that manifest in each of these types, specifically in leadership. But her book is also, it's kind of got 2 themes. The first theme is on leadership piece, but the second theme is on interactions in the workplace, how to get along with the people that you're working with based on knowledge, knowing your Enneagram type and the Enneagram type of your coworkers and the people that you're working with. And so we wanted to focus this podcast on more of that interactive piece, those the dynamics that you have with the people that you work with, and you basically end up sort of living with them to some extent. Unlike your family, which to some extent you get to choose, who you're going to spend all your time with at home and your discretionary time. In the workplace, you don't really get that option as well. You are put on teams and you're working with the people that you're working with. So we wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive into that interpersonal piece. And Beatrice, can you explain a little bit about, or describe a little bit about some of the principles that the book looks at in, trying to work better with your teammates and the people that you're employed with?
Sure. I would say sort of the big idea is that the more you understand yourself, and your default patterns, the way you tend to react to things, what's important to you, what you tend to focus on. And the more you understand that other people are different and what the kinds of things they focus on, the more easily you'll be able to work together, because you'll be able to sort of know and manage yourself and your own responses, be more flexible when interacting with other people. And you'll also be able to have more empathy and understanding of other people. And, if someone you're working with does something that you would never do or approaches a problem in a way that you never would have thought of, instead of thinking like, what are they doing? Are they crazy? You can sort of understand, oh, well, they're just coming from this whole different perspective that isn't mine. And that if I understand it, we'll be able to bridge whatever gaps we have more easily, and work together with by having an understanding of what our differences are.
Yeah. The first question that comes up for me in all of this is, are there certain types that get along better in the workplace, and are there certain types that tend to be sort of like water and oil? Types
themselves or types with each other? When you say start to get along in the workplace, you mean with other people or get along in the workplace in general?
I mean with other, are there certain combinations of types
Gotcha.
that tend to be a little bit more difficult to engage and interact with?
Well, I don't think so. I think what it more is that every combination of types has ways that they might get along well, sort of natural points of sympathy or of understanding, and natural points of difference where they can get into trouble with each other. So I think if you look at it that way, it's not like you need to avoid certain types, or even that you have certain, good collaboration automatically with other types. I think it's more a matter of, if you know yourself and you know where they're coming from, or at least you know something about the fact that they might be coming from somewhere other than you, then you can both have an understanding of what you might need to do to understand them and work well with them. And more than anything else, I think the Enneagram provides a neutral language for people to talk to each other with. So in other words, if I'm having a problem with you at work, instead of saying, I don't like that you're doing this or you're doing something wrong, I can say, it seems like we're not really understanding each other here. I'm coming at it from I'm a 2, and I'm coming at it from this place, and I tend to see things this way. And I know you're a 3, so you might be seeing it this way, and I'm wondering if we can talk about that. And so it doesn't raise defensiveness. It doesn't create further problems that we're accusing each other, but hopefully it's a neutral language through which just to talk about how we're looking at things from different angles.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to remember, because I believe that while typology systems are very powerful, and when they're used well, they can be extremely constructive. And then when we abuse the system by over-relying on it or using stereotypes around it, I think that we come in with biases. Like the first thing I could think of is, I've worked with some Enneagram 5s in the past. And every time I work with an Enneagram 5, it always seems to be like, it never seems to go well. So I've created this bias around working with 5s, and maybe I just don't work well with 5s, and I can start sort of constructing this pattern. But it could also just have been the time and circumstance, or it could have been me, or it could have been, it has nothing to do with 5s. It just has to do with something completely different. And I think sometimes we come in with these biases like, oh, I can't get along with 1s. They're too perfectionistic. Or I can't get along with 6s. That devil's advocate thing drives me crazy, or whatever it is. 4s are too dramatic. Like we get these sort of stereotypes in our heads, and then we enter the workplace, and a part of what might be creating the problem is that those of us that know typology might be over relying on it as a tool, and then sort of projecting outward some of these biases that we have. And I think that's what I love about the Enneagram, is that it's a constant reminder to stop doing that, to go inward within yourself and be reflective about the self.
Right, exactly. I think if you've had a bad experience with a particular person, and happen to know their type, you can start getting the idea in your head of, oh, I don't like those types, or I don't get along with that kind of person. When really it's not like that. It's that the more you understand that person, the more you can get along with them and get over any stereotypes that you might have. And of course, like you're saying, it's really important to be aware of yourself. Of what you might be bringing into the situation or projecting onto the other person, or the assumptions you might be making on your past experience.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to say is, I think, I know I do this. I think we all overvalue our own experience, right? We come to the workplace, we come to a situation, and we assume, oh, I have a challenge getting along with that other person or those other people. But there's obviously things about me that are probably hard to get along with for others. And I think that's really, you just hit on that. There's a way for us to use the Enneagram to look inward and see, what is it about me that's difficult? Like, so for example, I'm an Enneagram 6. I'm a social 6. And I have that devil's advocate part of me, very much so. I very much am always questioning and thinking of backup plans and redundancies, and it's very much I challenge things out of the gate. I challenge new ideas, and that can be Antonia could tell you, when she's presenting a new idea, sometimes that can be frustrating, because before she's even complete with it, I'm poking holes in it. And it's something I've had to become very self-aware around, to say, I'm difficult to work with in this area. Like, I poke holes in ideas too soon, and I need to slow down, hear the full idea, and then start to challenge or give it some criticism. So speak to that. Is there, I don't know if there's a principle, or how can we look at using this for ourselves too when we show up to the workplace?
Well, it's interesting, because I have a section in each chapter of what a person of that type can do to be easier to work with. So the more aware you are of your type 6 patterns, and the more you're taking account of them, the more you can strategize about, okay, here's what I need to remember, or here's what I need to make a point of doing. And I could read a little piece of that from the type 6 chapter if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. So it helps people with a type 6 style to remember that not everyone needs as much time and space to test and question plans and proposals. It can be important for them to realize that others may experience their questions as a challenge or as disagreement, as opposed to an effort to support the plan's eventual success. When 6s question people, others may believe they're trying to argue against or undermine the proposal, as opposed to trying to make it better by poking holes in it to identify potential problems ahead of time. It will help 6s to clarify their intentions when they push back or question others' work.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
That resonates a lot for me personally, obviously.
Well, and I think what you and I did, Joel, is because I would put forth an idea, not even like a business idea, but just like a concept, and you would play devil's advocate, and I would almost get like my feelings hurt, like you don't value what I think or have to say. And so what you started doing is you like let me know that you were playing devil's advocate. Like you would say, hey, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, and then you would start saying what you were going to say. And so just having that little, disclaimer at the beginning actually made a big difference.
Well, it's so much part of my wiring. I didn't know I was even, like, I thought it was obvious I was playing devil's advocate.
Right.
For everybody around me, but that's not obvious. And so now I'm learning I need to state that so people realize what's happening.
Right, exactly. So in the last podcast, you mentioned that the two most common maybe stereotypes, and maybe they're maybe overrepresented in the business world as well, because our world is set up to reward them in business, were 8s and 3s. They were the two types that have a tendency to gravitate towards management roles and, leadership roles. And is there, I think the first question I would have is like, are there certain types that don't get along and certain types that get along better? And I think that you beautifully handled that by saying, well, it's kind of more that, if you come to the table recognizing that yours is not the only perspective, then you can kind of get along with anybody, because on some level, every single type has some simpatico and something that might not, gel as well. So it's more of just kind of a recognition of that. But if most people have 8s and 3 bosses, I guess my second question would be, are there anything, is there anything you can share that would help people navigate that space? Like if they have an 8 or a 3, person who's in a leadership position, team manager, C-level or whatever, to make it so that they can maybe present ideas to them in a way that makes more sense, or just get along with them better.
Sure. So I just gave an example of, with Joel in type 6, of how there's some tips about what he can do to make himself more understood. But I also have tips for people on how to get along with people of whatever type. So for instance, in terms of getting along with 3s, here are some tips that you can think about to work well with them. So for one thing is be competent and get things done, right? So 3s are going to like you, or they're going to get along well with you if they trust that you'll do a competent job and do what you say you're going to do and meet your deadlines and do quality work in a timely fashion. And if you don't, be accountable when your work isn't up to expectations or when you make a mistake. I think sometimes 3s like to be left alone to do what they do. Like 3s like to have the freedom to get things done quickly on their own schedule. So it can be important to remember that they may, you can check in with them, but maybe say, hey, can we talk? Maybe not now, but when you have time, to kind of respect their timing and their schedule. I think another thing is to be mindful of 3's preferred pace. So 3s move really fast. And your pace may not be as fast as theirs. And so again, it's about just recognizing that difference. But if your 3 boss, let's say, doesn't really know the Enneagram, and they may just be moving fast and may get frustrated for you if you're moving slower. So again, if you're aware of that and maybe don't take it personally, that they get really bothered if you slowed something down. You just kind of can either speed up, or if you can't, you can let them know and communicate with them about, what's going on. Another big one for 3s is don't waste their time. 3s are very sensitive to like meetings that go on too long that aren't getting anywhere. If you're talking too much and it's not relevant to what they need to do, things like that. 3s like you to communicate in bullet points. Also recognizing that relationships for 3s may be secondary to work. I was one time working with a senior leadership team, and there was a guy in the team who was a 3, and there was a woman who was a 2. And she, in the context of our team session, said to him, sometimes when you shoot me an email and you just start off with, here's what I need from you, or here's what's going on. Sometimes what would help me is a little bit of personal contact before you launch into the work tasks, like, hey, how are you doing? Or I hope you had a good weekend. For me, she said, that helps me feel like we're like person to person connecting, instead of you're just launching into, here's what you need to do for me. Another thing is to not expect them to want to spend time dealing with your feelings. So if your boss is a 3 and you're having an emotional issue or something, my suggestion would be to put a lot of attention in working through it or talking to someone about it, such that when you talk to your boss, if you need to talk to them about something, you're not coming from an emotional place. You can talk about the fact that you had a feeling about something, but be communicating it in a way that is not emotional in the moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think another thing is recognizing that that kryptonite for 3s is failure. That 3s avoid failure at all costs. So helping them to avoid failure can be something, to showing them that you're on their team and really wanting things to succeed, and also recognizing them for their efforts and their achievements. Sometimes it's really important for 3s to know that they have your respect or that you appreciated something that they did.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a 3 and I resonate with pretty much that entire list. But one of the challenges I've had is that I know that like morale is not really something that I'm particularly good at checking in with on a regular basis. And so I've almost gone the opposite direction in the sense of like I almost try to make it all about the team and how they were feeling, and I found myself in a problem there too. Like I overcompensated and then I was like too much about like, is this okay with you, or are you all right with that, and like how are you feeling? And I feel like that overcompensation, I realized that when I was trying to compensate for what is clearly a blind spot, I think I was very clumsy there as well. And so I've kind of come back to this sort of 3, like, you know what, this is a business and we got to get things done. And I think I'm going to be a little less touchy-feely because that clearly is not a strength of mine. And I think the other piece of it too is when as a 3, I recognize that, that piece about hating failure. And so what I did is I actually, as part of my personal development, I opened myself up to failure, going, you know what, I'm going to fail sometimes, and that's just how it is. And knowing my team has my back when I fail, not just when I succeed, not just supporting me to succeed, but knowing my team has my back even through failure is, I'm realizing, very important to me. So that, failure isn't the biggest deal in the world and I'm not overwhelmed with it. Just going like, yeah, you know what? Sometimes we're going to fail when we figure this out. So like a lot of those 3 suggestions I can really, really resonate with.
Yep. Good. And you make some good points about sometimes we can overcorrect or something like that. And I don't think a lot of times it's just about being aware of these things.
What about if you're working with an 8 as a boss, somebody that's in charge? Again, these are not every boss is going to be a 3 or an 8. Not every supervisor or somebody in charge or CEO is going to be 3 or 8. But these are characters that we seem to show up a lot in leadership. So if you're working with an 8, somebody over you, how do you see that?
So I think it's important to do things like tell the truth. So 8s really want people to be honest with them. Keep them informed, don't hide things or do something that could potentially undermine their authority. They like to know what's going on so they can control the workflow. Another thing is similar to 3s, don't beat around the bush. Don't give them a book when they want bullet points. Be brief, direct, and to the point. Because it's like 8s are also a bit sensitive to wasting time, and they just kind of want to know the facts and the main points. I think 8s respect people who work well independently. Like they will like it if they can give you something and you can run with it. And then you come back and you've done it really well without having to follow up a lot or having them have to, hold your hand or do it for you. Another thing is to support them in taking action. 8s are very action oriented. So try not to slow them down or interrupt them unless it's important. Understand how they want to make decisions and move forward. And so if you can support their forward momentum, that's good. If you need to ask them to pause before they act, actually that can be doing them a service, but make sure you do it in a way that's direct and point to good evidence for why you're doing it. And then the last thing I'll say, which this can be a little bit challenging, I know it is for me, is try not to be afraid of conflict with them. 8s are, a lot of 8s wouldn't necessarily say they like conflict, but they pretty much all can do it. And they aren't as afraid of it as some of the rest of us are. And so and they respect people who aren't afraid to kind of meet them energetically in conflict or being direct or being assertive. So I would say use the fact that you have an 8 in your life as an opportunity, if conflict or confrontation is difficult for you, to learn to do it better. To learn to say what you really think, because in the end, the 8 will respect you, even if in the moment they push back or they don't like what you're saying, or you get into an argument or something along those lines. It's a good thing. They want people to stand up to them, to meet them, and they will respect you more for it.
Thanks for that list. I think both those are really good overviews of the 2 types that end up in leadership. From your experience working with businesses, there's a quote I heard. If somebody knows the source of this quote, I would love for you to leave comments under this podcast. Let me know, because it's not coming to my mind right now. I've been searching the Google of my mind and I cannot find it. But someone said at some point, every organization is a shadow of its leader or its leadership. I forget the exact terminology. Have you noticed a pattern of people in leadership in a company or an organization? Either there's an ethos or an expectation or even a requirement that everyone really interacts in the style that they prefer, what their Enneagram type is. So maybe an 8 really requires his team to maybe go with more conflict on the lower levels. Like he encourages conflict, or he or she encourages conflict from a leadership standpoint. Or have you noticed maybe another type encourages more collaboration? Have you noticed things filtering down through organizations, through entire teams that skew the dynamic of the team based on the leader in your work?
I would say yes. I would say that oftentimes the leader does have a weighted presence. Some people assume that the leader will have more of an impact than sometimes he or she does. I have a friend who's a CEO of a company, and he's very interested in the Enneagram, and he's actually looking a lot at how organizations themselves have Enneagram styles. And at first you might think that an organization's sort of cultural Enneagram style might be exactly the same as their leader. And sometimes that's true, but what he's told me is sometimes it isn't. There may be other factors in the culture or in the product or in the organizational or context that skews the organizational cultural aspect in another direction. But certainly what you're saying about the shadow of the leader having an impact on the organization definitely can. Sometimes I find that on teams, a leader will tend to hire a lot of people of her or his own type, unconsciously, of course. Sometimes they feel more comfortable working with someone who's more similar to them, and oftentimes their values and their ideas carry a lot of weight. So I think in general that can be true, and of course the things that they don't look at, their blind spots can definitely become a blind spot of an organization. I actually worked with a board of directors recently where the board of directors was led by an 8, and I found that this board had some of the qualities of that person and also some of the blind spots. So I think it can happen, but I think it depends on the company, and it depends on what other factors are going on. So it's a complex mix that I think affects the organization or a team within the organization, but certainly the leadership style of the leader has a big impact on all of that.
Yeah. And you listening right now, if you are in a leadership position at a company, even in your family, a nonprofit, maybe a social club or a church you're involved with, I think one of the keys here, well, the takeaways for me as a leader in my own company is to say, what from this can I look at to say, there's probably things I'm not noticing about myself. There's things I can grow. There's blind spots I have that my team is interacting with me on that I may not be aware of. And so I think what the Enneagram can really help with, if you're a leader listening, is for you to see those blind spots, to get a path of growth, to really examine yourself and to see how people are interacting with you and how you're interacting with other people that you're leading. And I think it could be a really, really great tool, no matter what your type is. Again, we just highlighted a couple types here that are common leadership types. But like we talked about in the last podcast, Beatrice went through every single type in the Enneagram system and showcase some of the strengths they bring to the leadership table and then some of the blind spots they have. So if you haven't heard that podcast, go listen to that because she really went through a quick cursory overview of that for all the types. So I think this is really powerful as a tool for you as a leader listening.
Yeah. We probably already went through it, but as we can, complete this podcast, Beatrice, is there like an underlying principle that you would share with with the listener that regardless of your personality type, just remember this underlying principle and this will lubricate the relationships you have in the workplace?
I guess if I were to boil it down to one principle, it would be know thyself. It would be know who you are, understand yourself, put out some effort to really do some personal self-awareness work, because the more you know yourself, the more you'll be able to understand how you react, what you're bringing to the table, what you're doing well, places you could get better. And also you won't project as much out onto others as you will if you're not as aware of yourself and having a deep sense of knowledge of yourself. It was inscribed on the temple at Delphi for a reason. It was in ancient Greek life, knowing yourself was the core piece of any education. And I think if you do that, you're also modeling self-awareness and self-responsibility for other people, which can be huge in a leadership position. If you're acknowledging a mistake, or if you're recognizing when you reacted to something and you need to apologize, that sets an incredible tone for interactions that you have with others. People feel more comfortable owning their own mistakes and trusting you. And so I think being self-aware is the absolute number one principle, I would say, that the Enneagram conveys, and the teaching around it, and also just what I would say in terms of working with leaders and people in organizations.
Yeah, and what better way than to grab yourself a copy of The 9 Types of Leadership by Beatrice Chestnut. So we highly recommend grabbing a copy. We'll put a link to the book underneath this podcast. Beatrice, what is the best way for people to find it if they don't go to our website and go to that link?
They can find out information from it on my website, beatricechestnut.com. Scroll down to the bottom of the homepage. It's available on Amazon and other online and offline bookstores.
Great. And also, we partnered with Beatrice to create a program here from Personality Hacker called the Enneagram Roadmap. You can find out more information about that program if you really want to go into a deep dive of, understanding how to use the Enneagram for personal growth. She goes very deep into the 27 subtypes. We talked about that on the first podcast we interviewed Beatrice on months ago. And it's a great program. I don't want to just take up any more time here talking about it. Go to personalityhacker.com, find out more information about it. And I would recommend you invest in yourself and invest in the program if you get a chance, because it's fantastic. Beatrice, thank you for being with us on the podcast, these 2 podcasts, and all the wisdom, all the knowledge, all the understanding that you bring from the Enneagram into the world here. We really, really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for all the work you're doing to help people grow. And thank you for partnering with me in this work.
Absolutely. We want to hear from you. You've been sitting on the other side of the podcast here without a microphone. Your microphone is to come over to personalityhacker.com, leave a comment or ask a question directly below this podcast. We'd love to have your voice represented in the community. And speaking of the community, if you'd like to join a community of like minds, head over to facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly giving, you could leave us a rating and review on iTunes. That helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.